Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump both have their eyes on key battleground states today. Trump will be heading west to Arizona, while Harris will be in North Carolina to give rallies as she looks to capitalize on the momentum from Tuesday's debate that she's widely considered to have dominated. Well, the state of democracy in the US was a key question during the debate. Donald Trump often speaks in glowing terms when talking about dictators and has been running what some experts describe as an openly authoritarian campaign. Monte tells us what some experts on democracy have to say about that.
When Donald Trump spoke to a gathering of Christian supporters in late July, he said something that even for Trump seemed so over the top, it left many wondering what exactly he meant.
Christians, get out and vote. Just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed. It'll be fine. In 4 years, you don't have to vote again. We'll have it fixed so good you're not going to have to vote.
Democrats said the comments signaled his plans to be a dictator, while the Trump campaign claimed he was just talking about uniting the country. Former Republican Representative Liz Cheney, who chaired the January 6th committee in Congress, has been warning for months if Trump wins a second term, he would refuse to leave office after his term expires in 4 years.
Our nation can survive and recover from policy mistakes. We cannot recover from a president willing to torch the Constitution.
Donald Trump is the first U.S. president to refuse to accept the outcome of an election, to falsely insist the 2020 race was stolen from him, and to encourage his followers to contest the results, as they did violently on January 6th. Trump also has an affinity for authoritarian leaders and has said he would be a dictator on just the first day if he's reelected. Whether Trump wins or loses, experts say there are numerous warning signs that American democracy is in danger.
Because the Republican Party is now an autocratic party that has election denial and corruption and lying about elections baked into it. So if the election has an outcome that isn't favorable to Donald Trump, they're telling us that they're not going to accept the results. What will happen after that? Some form of violence. It would be larger than January 6th because Trump has been radicalizing his followers.
But experts say the threat to democracy is broader than just Trump and point to a recent ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court as a major obstacle. The justices have effectively shielded a president from criminal prosecution for official acts, which, as one dissenting justice pointed out, could even include executing one's political opponents.
The Supreme Court's decision on immunity is an extraordinarily broad and sweeping one and really elevates the president to a kind of king figure, which is clearly not something that the framers would have wanted, having just defeated a king.
Experts also say the court has left the door open for a president to abuse his power. Trump, who is the first former president to be a convicted felon, has also suggested if he's reelected, he would use the FBI and Justice Department to indict his political enemies. Trump has dismissed all such concern, claiming it's the Democrats who are the real threat, and that he's the one who actually took a bullet for democracy when someone tried to assassinate him at a campaign rally.
Well, Monte joins me in the studio now. It's good to see you, Monte.
You too.
So you just mentioned in that report that many experts considered Donald Trump a threat to democracy. How is the Republican Party under Trump preparing to contest the election results if he loses in November?
Well, this follows a very familiar pattern for Donald Trump, and it begins by sowing doubt about the fairness and integrity of the election. He did that in 2016, which he ended up winning. He did it in 2020, and now he's doing it in 2024, and he's really intensified those efforts. He says things like the election is rigged by a corrupt media. It's a rigged system. He makes these kinds of accusations on a daily basis on the campaign trail. You might recall after the last election, Trump's own Homeland Security officials called the election, the most secure election in American history. His very own Attorney General Bill Barr at the time said there was no evidence of substantial fraud, and the Trump team lost dozens of lawsuits that were disputing the results. So sowing doubt is a familiar tactic. What's different in this election cycle is that the Republican Party is already preparing to contest the results before the voting has even begun. For one thing, Trump has essentially taken control of the Republican Party apparatus. His daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, now co-chairs the Republican National Committee, which has installed a senior counsel for election integrity to prevent election cheating. And that is a woman by the name of Christina Bobb, and she is a lawyer who has been indicted in Arizona for trying to overturn the election results there in 2020. And she actually faces possible life in prison if she's convicted for her part in that scheme. And one of their tactics has been to file dozens of lawsuits on election rules. So they've filed at least 90 lawsuits in many states across the country. And the outcomes of these lawsuits could happen near the election and potentially could affect the results.
And what is the goal of these lawsuits? What is the RNC hoping to accomplish here?
Well, so the lawsuits are mostly aimed at mail-in voting, which is the preferred method of Democrats. Just to give you an example, the RNC is suing in Nevada. So in Nevada, you can have your ballot counted 4 days after the election. Up until 4 days, there's this grace period. But the RNC wants to do away with that grace period. So in the midterm elections in 2022, tens of thousands of ballots were counted during that grace period. So if that lawsuit is successful, it would essentially disenfranchise tens of thousands of voters. And when you're talking about a race that is this close as it appears to be between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, that could really make a big difference.
But filing lawsuits is not the only tactic that the RNC is taking. There's also an effort to disrupt how the election will be certified in several swing states. Is that right?
Well, that's right. I think the best example of this is what's happening in the state of Georgia. You'll remember this is a state that Joe Biden won by 11,000 votes in the last election, and Donald Trump was indicted for trying to overturn the results in that state. There was that infamous phone call between Donald Trump and the Secretary of State in Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, where he's asking Raffensperger to, quote, find 11,000 votes for him. Raffensperger refused. Now, he remains the Secretary of State, but he is no longer head of the election board there. It is a 5-member board, and Republicans in the state have installed 3 Trump loyalists to that board. In fact, at a recent rally in Georgia, Trump called them out each by name, calling them, quote, pit bulls who were fighting for victory. Now, they are election deniers, meaning that they believe the lie that Donald Trump won in 2020, and they've already voted to change their role in certifying the results in 2024. Normally, this is a board that has no authority to block the certification. It's just a ministerial function, but the board has passed these new rules enabling members to conduct what is called a, quote, reasonable inquiry before certifying the results, without defining what reasonable inquiry means, which of course could create a delay. It could sow more doubt about alleged fraud. And Democrats have sued to challenge this move. And Brad Raffensperger, who we should remind people is a Republican, has said these rule changes have invited chaos into the process. Now, we're seeing similar things happening in Arizona and Michigan. So this really sets the stage for what could be a long and drawn out fight over certifying the results, even if Kamala Harris were to win decisive victory.
Monte Francis, thank you so much for that piece of analysis there. Well,